Okay, well, I'm going to start. My name is Karen Lowry, and this webinar is about civil rights protection for kids with ADHD. Again, my name is Karen Lowry. I am the founder of an online resource, addadvocate.com, and it comes from my passion for ADHD. My background is I'm a pediatric nurse for many years, dealing with critically ill children and their families. So I progressed to having a family, and lo and behold, all of my kids have ADHD, my youngest being the most impacted. So he has been my job for 26 years, going to countless IEP meetings and advocating for his civil rights. And so that I know for a fact that this is not an easy journey for many of us. I think ADHD is a very complicated medical disorder. It's not looked at that sometimes for so many, but it definitely is a medical disorder. And I always like to reinforce and explain why it is a medical disorder. So because of my background, I realized that so many parents were left out in the lurch, didn't understand, weren't getting support for their kids. I became an ADHD coach, and then moved on to developing this webinar and this resource that I have. So I want to present this particular webinar to show you how civil rights connect to the support of your ADHD child. So in 2017, and many Dear Colleague letters are written, this particular one was written from the Department of Education to all states in the country. Why? Because between 2011 and 2015, the Office of Civil Rights received 16,000 complaints from parents from various school districts in the country. And why? Because their children lacked school support. And they did filings to the Office of Civil Rights, and they saw the momentous amount of complaints, as well as 2,000 of them were complaints regarding ADHD, children with ADHD, lack of evaluations, and ineffective support. So the content was 32 pages, a guide that was added to this letter containing the need for identifying kids with ADHD, as well as needed program placements and support. I mean, I'd like to think that that made a difference in our world. I'm sure that it did to a point, but I think that we have a long ways to go in understanding ADHD and making sure that schools understand and provide the adequate support. So where we start, from my point of view, is making sure parents understand their rights and how to advocate for their child. And that's really what I'm all about. It's all about providing information, not only information I've read, information that I've used, information I've lived, and passing it on to you so that you can better advocate for your child. So this particular guidance was related to the support using 504s. Now, a 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a federal law protecting individuals with disabilities from discrimination. This is including physical as well as mental disorders. It is not considered special education. It is support within the general education. It includes accommodations in areas that are impacting accessing education. And I'll say it more than once, but again, many times I think families receive 504s, and it is either because they want to start with a 504 before they move on to any kind of serious evaluation in special education, or it's truly valuable in that they only need some accommodations, not to change what they learn in a 504, but how they learn it. So, and again, I write that here too. Content is not changed. It is how they educate. That is how education is accessed. The eligibility has to be a disability that impacts a major life function. So there's a ton of major life functions, but the ones that really kind of relate to ADHD would be learning, concentrating, working, those kinds of things. Those are related to ADHD. So the question is, does every child with ADHD need a 504? And of course not. And I think that's also very important. It's one of my big things among a handful of things about ADHD that I like to reinforce. So a child is not like a walking ADHD. A child may have ADHD, but again, the child is the individual, and the ADHD impacts that child in many different ways. So therefore, just because a child has ADHD does not mean they are eligible or need a 504. Many times, and again, ADHD, a continuum of symptoms from mild to, pretty severe in the way they impact education. So it just depends on that child and how he's impacted. An informal evaluation is done to determine if eligibility exists for a 504. Who can have a 504? And again, obviously, in this case, we're talking about ADHD. The data has to show that an impacted major life function is interfering with accessing education in a child with ADHD. And like I said before, these three, learning, concentrating, working, are examples of a life function that is impacted. So how do we get a 504? There is no formal testing, unlike when your child may go into a special education program using an IEP. This is mainly just grades. Now, grades alone do not grant eligibility, but certainly they are part of the package to look at how they're impacted. I mean, if you have a child who is impacted in a certain way, which would be in a certain class, then you might see a difference in grades versus another class where he maybe doesn't have to use some of the functions that are required in another class, like maybe concentrating or comprehension, those kinds of things. So again, there's no formal testing. I think in this case, really important is communication between the school and the parent, because the parent really can also add insight as to what's going on, because obviously the child comes home and has homework. So what's going on at home as well. And, ADHD being defined impacts more than one environment. So he has ADHD that he's in school, he's at home. There's issues in both environments that are showing his struggles. So the communication is really, really important. And it may be the parent or the child that brings it to the forefront to make that kind of assessment as to whether or not that child needs, further looking at, like maybe a 504 is important for him. No, evidence of not being on a task, need for movement, things like that, not completing classroom assignments on time, anxiety, and of course, not completing homework either. And like I said, either the school or the parent brings up the concerns they each have regarding how that child's impacted and how he or she is accessing education. Sometimes the school thinks that they can do certain things that they can't, and I didn't mention this, down the road we would talk about it, but sometimes schools actually ask for a child to be on medication, which is not in their lane, and they're not allowed to do that. In addition, they can't demand medical documents to agree to evaluate. They can't do that. They really are in a position of being obligated to support the suspected disability. Even if that child doesn't have a diagnosis, they must support a suspected disability. So mitigating factors should not be included. Now, what I mean by that is, one example would be, and really it's anything that's like trying to help that child access education doesn't wipe away the diagnosis of ADHD and the struggles that child has. So you may have a child who maybe started a 504, let's say, and maybe ended up being evaluated, confirming a diagnosis, ends up on medication, has some better focus, maybe a little less impulsivity, those kinds of things. Those are mitigating factors that do not impact eligibility. It should not. The head of the 504 team, what I've seen is either a guidance counselor or a principal. So if you were the parent and you were concerned about some issues around what you saw as struggles in your child, then you would just ask the school, like, who is the person who runs the 504 program? And that is the person you would reach out to. And also I encourage always reaching out in writing. And again, once data is collected, eligibility is determined. And again, 504s do not include or do not change the content of education, only the way in which it is accessed. The other thing that I've seen a lot, the idea that a 504 is optional, and absolutely not. A 504, just like a special ed IEP, is a legal document and it is in place to be followed. And I've seen this more than once. I think it's important that once your child has a 504, to be sure that, especially in the upper grades when he or she has multiple teachers, that everyone is aware of this 504. Everyone is aware of those accommodations, so that it is followed. Interesting, I had someone on my Facebook page ask me a question, and I hope that she's here tonight. And I don't really understand it, but a child who is on a 504, and the principal apparently has suggested that another school would suit him better. And so I think there are some questions about why he would say that. I would tend to think that that comment came from maybe some behavioral issues that are not being supported. And again, those are just as important as any academic issue that a child can have. And the school, again, is obligated to test for and follow the 504. So I found that interesting. Here, 504 is not even special education. And, a school can't just decide that they can transfer a child. And I've seen it before. That's why I think it's behavior, where children are encouraged to be transferred because they believe they can't support that child and that behavior. And although in this case, she never said that, but I've seen that. And that is not okay. I just wrote down some examples of accommodations. Many times they are on the 504. And again, I think it's important for you parents to know that, look at the accommodations that are placed and ask yourself whether or not they would help your child, because you know your child best. So you need to know, they need to know what's the best way of helping this child. Oftentimes, one of the most common accommodations is extra time. And like I said, extended time on homework or classwork. I think you have to be careful with that. I mean, I think some parents really think it works, and maybe it does. But I think you have to just evaluate that if you have extended time on homework, because you could get into a vicious circle where the extended time creates just more time for that child to be impulsive and not be focused. In the meantime, while you have extra time, there are other assignments floating through, right? So now you're more behind because you've had that extended time. So it kind of depends on what that looks like for your child and if it really is something helpful. But just be aware that, there's no accommodation that is important to put in necessarily, or that there's an obligation to put in on this document, even though they're already put in when you see it. You can change it. You can make changes. Or if you're not sure, just watch it and see if this is something that's really helping your child or not. Or maybe it's not. Peer notes, because many times our kids with ADHD without a learning disability have maybe some comprehension issues or maybe some working memory or some processing issues. So let's say they're supposed to be taking notes in a class, and for them, it's moving pretty quickly and they can't keep up with the notes. So that would be a really good accommodation if you had a child with some processing issues like that, or some excessive non-focus periods, things like that. Either peer notes or teacher notes. Graphic organizers, that's just like helping to, that umbrella of executive functioning, including organizing, time management, initiating assignments, planning out, that's all under that umbrella of executive functioning skills, which most of the time our kids with ADHD have, which again makes ADHD even more complicated because those are things you can't see. And I think sometimes because you have a child with behavioral issues, and then you have kids with executive functioning deficits, it can be thought that that's behavioral. Like if they are old enough to do this, they are old enough to be organized. They are old enough to start this assignment on their own. And it's behavior, and it's not. It's not. And that's where a lot of the misunderstanding and frustrations occur that I see in school. Study guides, another, which kind of goes along with the note taking that's very difficult depending on the class and the child. Movement breaks. Movement breaks are very important for many of the kids who have impulsivity. And remember, there are 3 kinds of ADHD, and all of them are called ADHD: impulsive, hyperactive, or inattentive, or combined. Flexible seating. And again, that's another question that you can ask yourself. Like, it depends on what does that mean? Flexible seating in the back of the class, in the front of class, in the middle of the class, away from something. It just kind of depends on the classroom and your child and what's going on in the class. So not just one set of flexible seating, it could be anything. Extra set of books at home, that can be really helpful too, especially when, a child's coming home and they're forgetting the right book to bring. A few others, different responses to tests that work for the child. If it worked better for a test to be verbal rather than written. Positive reinforcement for a part of an assignment completed rather than taking points off for not having it completed. And that could be helped too if you have assignments that require less questions to be completed, as long as it demonstrates understanding, because it is general education. Because the problem is our kids have trouble focusing, especially at the end of the day and with homework, and they get bored, physiologically bored. And sometimes it's not necessary maybe to have, 30 math questions if they can do 15, and even that's a lot, but if they can demonstrate understanding. So that's a possibility. Helping with organization, chunking assignments into manageable parts. That's a really tough thing for many of our kids with ADHD. Again, it's part of that executive functioning, where that would come in if there was a required paper or something. And the chunking and the time management would require writing out pieces of what needs to be done each day up until the due date. That can be very helpful. And again, communication is just the most important thing. Once the 504 is developed, there should be a decision around how often responses to accommodations will be discussed. You're not obligated to set a 504 up and then say, okay, I'll see you at the end of the school year, 9 months, and we'll discuss it. That's not going to work. There has to be a conversation around how often and how it will be looked at, as far as, are these accommodations working? Do we need to tweak something, take it away, add, or is nothing working? And in order to make those evaluations, there has to be knowledge that it has to be followed, and everyone has to be aware that that child has it. And like I said, can be modified at any time. Because after all, this is a support. If you have a support in place and the child completes a full year of school with no success, then it was useless. And that can't happen. Making sure everyone has it. Now, I've read often too, legally, the school is not required or mandated to include parents in the planning of a 504. But that's one thing. I've never seen that. I've never seen a school not include a parent in a 504. I mean, first of all, if the parent's the one that's approaching the school because of concerns, obviously the parent's involved. If the school decides that there's concerns on their end, I see them reaching out to the parent, and that's what they should do because parents know their child better than anyone. So, so legally, they don't have to, but they do. That's what I see, and they should. I've said this also before, the individuality of the 504 is so important for success. Have those struggles impeding access to education been alleviated? And again, that is why there has to be a plan for how often and who and in what way the response to these accommodations will be. And again, each teacher, if he has multiple teachers, you can get feedback too with the struggles seen in every classroom. The possibility to change and modify again is there. And what to do if this 504 plan seems unsuccessful. And that's a hard decision. I don't think it's a black and white because again, it goes along with kids being individualized. So, the question, how long do I leave a 504 plan in place before evaluation? There needs to be other evaluations because this child's not successful. And again, I think that it really kind of depends on the child. And if you see improvement, but not enough, and can it add or tweak those accommodations, or if you just don't see improvement over the course of maybe a few weeks, that's important to take a look at. And again, the consistency. And remember too, we're talking functional, behavioral, and academic as well. That those consistent struggles, regardless of the accommodations, may need the need for a full psychoeducational evaluation done by the school for free. They are obligated to support a suspected disability, as I said. Reasons for this evaluation: up to 50% of kids with ADHD do have a learning disability. That's a lot. Also, executive functioning deficits can be very significant and may need special education, as well as behavioral issues are another reason for further evaluation. In that case, it's functional behavioral assessments that determine triggering factors that are causing behavior. And you might want to move, and that will be my next webinar, in discussing next steps, which is an IEP. You would need a plan and a goal because 504s don't have any of that. We're only talking modifying their environment to access their education to alleviate the struggles that they have. If you have other issues that need really direct special education teaching, then you may end up facing an IEP, which I will again talk about in my next webinar. Again, I already said all this about individuality, a big one. I would say the two were individuality and communication is a big one. And again, the upcoming webinar I'll have will be to talk about if that 504 is not providing the support needed. So I just want to see, there seems to be a question, so I will. What if the evaluations reflect my kid? And then I guess I'm not too clear on the question. Could the school do evaluations and hence a plan without the parents' input? No, the evaluations, you have to. Well, we're talking about 504s. My understanding is yes, they can do informal evaluations or gathering data is more what I see. Gathering data about what's going on in the classroom, what is there missing assignments, kind of what the grades are, something like that. Claiming that the teachers know him well and that the school setting is different from home. Could the school do evaluations and hence a plan without the parents' input? Again, I've seen it written the 504s don't need parental input. I just have never seen where a school is going to just have a 504 and not discuss it with a parent. I just have never seen that. And you're going to know that they have a 504. And I think you would have to put your input in place. Could a school refuse an FBA and stick to an outdated FBA? So my son has an IEP, but he had an FBA last year. This year, they refused doing an FBA when all his issues are social, emotional. So he needs the FBA most. I guess what I would say to that is, again, data is everything. And it's important that, you know, maybe he had one last year and what did it show? And what kind of behaviors existed at that time? And now, like this year, how have the behaviors changed that make you want another evaluation of his behavior? And I think those are the things that you need to document to make sense out of that. They're going to push back because sometimes schools don't have someone in-house to do them. And they have to pay from an outside source. So, you know, sometimes that's going to be a reason to not really want to do another testing if they believe that, you know, it's adequate. Or if he has an IEP, then, you know, the data could show that maybe the goal needs to be revised in the IEP. Maybe the action plan needs to be revised in the IEP because of changing behaviors. Does anybody else have a question? You've done extensive assessments, neuropsychological assessment, which showed my son's disability is what manifests his behaviors. Okay, so it sounds like you may have even been to a manifestation meeting having to show that the behaviors relate to the disability, and they do. So if that's the case, the school is mandated to support that. So that means that if those behaviors are in place, you know, what kind of support is in place for him. And again, if you see behaviors that you didn't see before, it kind of, I think, backs up the need for another evaluation, or certainly the need to change your IEP, minimally, to change the IEP and ways to see if you can make things better. Yeah, that's a good question. I think Lindsay says, what's positive reinforcement for partial completion of assignment? So I think better than that would really be the accommodation that allows a portion of an assignment to be completed, and that's considered completed. I think I would find that difficult because it wouldn't be a positive thing if the child doesn't have the accommodation in place to only do some questions, and they do only some questions and it's partial, then they're going to get a 60, right? To me, I put that in there because I read it, but I've never really seen that. What I would think would be, and again, you as the parent would be the advocate, right? So if you saw an assignment that was partially done, because he just wasn't able to finish it for whatever reason. If we're talking about a homework assignment or a classroom assignment, that might be something too. Then it's just data, it's information to say, we need to relook at this and use this as an accommodation and pull back on the amount of problems, let's say in math, that we're requiring of him. Now, if it's like something else we as parents, we all want our kids to complete in full, and that's the tough part about this. In that situation, for a partial completion of assignment, I don't know. I think then the question is, why was it partially completed? I think you have to like delve into that to see what that is. When I read positive reinforcement, I guess I think too that I know that our kids with ADHD receive a lot of negativity many times. I've heard so much of it. I know my own son in particular too had it. Positive reinforcement from the teacher might be, you've done a great job in the quality of that partial assignment. You have demonstrated an understanding. You just haven't finished it. So it's a matter of how much more time did he need, extra time? Do we want to try just, making the assignment shorter? I think it could look like a lot of things. I think it's just looked at as data to look into further what really is going on and why is this partial? If that makes sense. It's kind of not a black and white situation, but it's hard. And I think many times, again, I'm afraid that teachers are not always understanding of ADHD. And I think sometimes, again, it's looked at as behavioral and they're maybe impulsive and not focused and daydreaming. And maybe the teacher sees some of that. And then if it's a classroom assignment, that child didn't get it all done because it looks like he didn't try. When in reality, he has a medical disability. And he needed a little bit more support in that area, whatever that is, depending on the subject matter. So I'm going to just, I would like to move from this webinar into oh, I'm sorry. Now you said I need help, please. Okay, so in the chat, oh, I had that here and I didn't. Well, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. Let me talk about, as I leave this webinar, about a new program that I am launching. I think it's important because, we live in a very, everybody has very busy lives and many times parents need support. So this online support is something that will hopefully help the parents advocate for their children on your own time. So let me talk about that for a minute, and then I'll come back to all of you in case there are other questions. So it is called the ADD Advocate Masterclass. And these are the components of my masterclass. On-demand access to 10 masterclass courses. And again, we're all busy. So on your own, you would have available to you 10 on-demand video courses with downloadable workbooks currently to help you be an advocate for your child. Because you know your child best. You are their best advocate. With future masterclass courses to come, more I will add to that platform. In addition, group coaching. And, some time ago, I did a poll and it seemed like parents like the group coaching aspect better than a one-on-one coaching. And I think it's because sometimes parents of children with ADHD, it can be a lonely journey. People feel maybe kind of left out. Sometimes our kids can be bullied and looked at as, the bad kid in many cases. And I think sometimes parents are blamed. Sometimes parents take that blame on themselves. What have I done wrong? Why is my kid not able to do what he's doing, when they don't fully understand ADHD? So I think that this group coaching, which I would do bi-weekly, would help with bringing everyone together who belongs to the EDD Advocate Masterclass, and would be different topics each week, depending on what people wanted to talk about, or maybe a topic I wanted to talk about. And also too, to belong to a private Facebook group that would be just the people that belong to this masterclass. I think I skipped this slide. I wanted to also just bring out, a lot of what I'm talking about, just talking about civil rights, talking about 504s and IEPs, the differences between accommodations and modifications, descriptions of your procedural safeguards, which relates to special education, the process of evaluation. And these are things that, we would talk about in group coaching as well, because it's not a black and white thing. It's all individual and things change. So it just depends on what's going on at the time. The elements of the IEP, there's very, very important elements of the IEP, and it's important for you to understand each of those elements to be an effective advocate for your child as well. The importance of the parent as an integral part of the IEP team. So unlike the 504 that specifies that you are not necessarily told about a 504 plan, but I've seen that that's pretty much what happens anyway. I think that it's said that way because I think there's no formal testing. In this case, yeah, you have to sign for an evaluation. And you were in the IDEA law, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, is very specific about the importance of parents in the IEP. IEP meetings cannot happen without a parent. If a parent can't make it, it has to be scheduled when they can make it. It's absolutely imperative that a parent, no school can have an IEP meeting and leave the parent out and make changes without the parent knowing. That is absolutely not done. Can't happen. And again, much more. Again, ADHD is a very complicated neurobiological medical diagnosis that impacts our kids in so many different ways and impacts their self-esteem in so many different ways. And that's why I find it so important for parents to fully understand ADHD and fully understand their rights. And we had talked about this. So for a limited time, I'm offering this masterclass for $87 per year. And you see the link here that I have to copy them. Oh, sorry, guys. So please go to that link and check it out, and think about the information that you need and the support that you would have among other parents with children with ADHD. I'm just checking on questions again. Yes, you can email me, Nala, Karen at ADD Advocate, and you can communicate with me through that. Okay. Can a homeschooled kid be considered to qualify for a 504, or is IDEA the best route? I think there's variability in that. I guess I'd have to investigate that to give you a better answer around that as far as homeschooling. But you speak of 504 and IDEA, so those are two very different support systems. The 504 would be general education. So it kind of depends on how your child is struggling, versus IDEA, which is the umbrella over special education IEP, individual education plan. So I guess it kind of depends on what you're feeling your child needs. My son is having a meeting tomorrow without me. No, that can't happen. How old is your son? I don't know why that would happen, why school would have a meeting with the child and not with you. What the goal would be. I don't know. I would be very concerned about that. You, the parent, has to be there. So I would make sure that doesn't happen. And I guess if you have concerns, then you schedule that IEP meeting with them, with you present, not with him. Now, at a certain age, I mean, it's not that kids who are older can certainly be in an IEP meeting. If you, the parent, chooses that, that's your decision. It's not theirs. I guess I'm confused. The chat is eliminating some words. Sorry, it's my son's school. So you're saying that your son is having a meeting tomorrow without you, an IEP meeting without you. That's my understanding. Your son is 6. The school team is conducting an IEP meeting without me. So the question is, how do you know that? And they can't. They can't. They have to reach out to you and do it when you're available. No, they can't do that. That seems like a very concerning situation. That's not something I hear that often, that a school would have a meeting without you. The only way that a school can have an IEP meeting without you is, if a parent said, I don't care anymore, I don't want to be at any of those meetings, and they document that. That's it. There's no way that school can do that legally. They're in big trouble if they do that. They send an invitation and I can't do it, and they insisted to do it to bind to the state deadline. No, there is no deadline. That IEP doesn't have a deadline. They can change the meeting. I've heard that excuse before too, that if you don't do an IEP by a certain date, let's say that in 2022 you had an IEP meeting on May 1st, IEP was developed. If you don't have the IEP meeting the following year before May 1st, your IEP will expire. And I think that's what you're telling me they said, and that is not true. It absolutely does not expire. No. But it's a huge issue. And I would tell them they need to reschedule the date for the IEP, because IDEA explicitly says parents have to be a part of that, and they're breaking the special ed law by not, and you'll file a complaint if they don't. And sadly, and again, every profession has good and bad, right? I'm not here to bash teachers or administrators, but every so often I do think that they do intimidate parents if they don't know their rights. And that is just like blatantly wrong. And I can't imagine that they truly believe that they're able to do that. It's very serious. Does anybody else have any questions? I'll let you think a minute. You're very welcome. I really am passionate about the support of parents with kids with ADHD. I can remember my first IEP meeting, and I was alone and I didn't know any better. And a lot of people sitting there, and I didn't know what I was getting into. Education, communicate, everything is important to know about all of this to be a good advocate. Because sometimes schools hope that you don't know, or sometimes schools don't know themselves. It's variable. So it kind of just depends. But it doesn't really matter what the reason is. The matter is you need to advocate for your child, because that child is having a lot of problems, and it's all affecting his self-esteem and down the road what he or she can accomplish. And our kids are bright, intuitive, sensitive. They're amazing people. Unfortunately, they're in an environment, a school environment, that doesn't allow for success sometimes. And that's the sad part of it all. You know, if they had the support, or the curriculum was a little bit different that pointed to the interests that they had, it would be a whole lot different. And I think a lot of times our kids soar later on when they're out of the school and they find their passion, but they still need the building blocks. You know, they have to be supported to get there. And that's why it's so important to advocate for our kids. Yes, this is being recorded. That's correct. Anybody else? My son has ADD, forget a lot. How can I help him to remember things? That's a good question. And yes, they do. Yes, they do. I think, you know, that's where a 504 could come in handy too, but I think they need resources, they need support, they need a toolkit kind of thing. So they don't forget, like whatever works. So there's a lot of online apps for that. But also the hardcover paper manual, you know, just a manual writing down dates and times and things like that, to me are even more important. Because if you have a child like in middle school, and now you have like reports, term papers, and those kinds of things, and you have a child who's impacted with executive functioning deficits, to me, I mean, I love technology, but I love paper and planning. And if you have that kind of thing, if you can look at that month and you can look at those weeks and see exactly what's in your way, along with extracurricular activities that are going to get in the way of this project, and you can like write things down and what things have to be done by a certain time, by a certain date, that can be really helpful in planning any kind of project. And, you know, you need like day-to-day things, little lists. There's nothing wrong with having a list, depending on what he's forgetting. A kid like that, forgetting a lot, there has to be things written down. And he has to get used to looking at those lists. So that working memory is very difficult. And if you can relieve that working memory that they struggle with by throwing stuff on a piece of paper that they can look at and remind themselves of, it's much less stressful and much more successful. If they have to get into that habit, right? If it's a habit of forgetting things leaving the house, then there has to be a spot where there is a list of those things that need to be done, or it's done the night before, but the list is there, and they get used to that structure and where to go to look for what I need. So those are it just kind of depends on where the struggles are, but yeah, our kids need tools. They absolutely need tools, and growing to adults, they need them as well. ADHD doesn't go away. You learn to live with it, and you mature and get better. And you learn about yourself and what impacts you and how you can make it better for yourself. But right now they need help in school, and they need to understand that they are having trouble, and that they can use support and they can do better. And they hear so much negativity when they can't do that. And the question always is, why would our kids on purpose want to be failing? They don't. They need help. What do you suggest when you continuously have asked for a 504 for your child and the school refuses to do one? We suspect a learning disability along with his diagnosis of ADHD and anxiety. Wow. I think if I were in those shoes, I would first of all make sure that you put everything in writing. And the other thing is documenting the data that you have that makes you believe that he needs a 504. That's huge. If you ask for a 504, school just says, nah, I don't want to. Or you ask for a 504 because this is what's happening in the classroom. This is what's happening at home. And he needs some support because of his, he has a diagnosis of ADHD. Or if you suspect a learning disability, there's nothing to say, and this is another good question too, there's nothing to say that, you have to go down the journey of a 504 and then you leap into an IEP later when it doesn't work. That doesn't happen. It doesn't have to happen. I mean, it does happen, but it doesn't have to happen. If you are now telling me that there's a suspect of a learning disability and you have reason to believe that, anxiety too is certainly impacting, then you could go right to, in writing, requesting a complete psychoeducational evaluation of all areas of suspected disability. And the school has to do that. They can't turn that down. If you document the data that you see, and that is why we believe that he needs a psychoeducational evaluation for IEP eligibility. I think that's based on what you're saying. That's what I would suggest. Now, for a school to just turn down 504, I mean, I have no idea why they would do that. And by what you're saying, he certainly may need more than that. If you have reason to suspect. And if you do, I would, document why. What you see at home, what you see at school, what is said to you, maybe from a teacher. Just any amount of data that you have is just so important to place in the letter, and not in the body of an email, but in an attachment to an email, a letter to the whole special ed team. And I mean, if you can find out the name of the case manager, and I'm sure, and you certainly can, and that's what I would do. Just get him evaluated now. Best case scenario is he doesn't have a learning disability, but it shows his struggles. You can have a child with ADHD with no learning disability, but if you see the testing, and you see testing that they do that impacts their processing speed, that impacts their working memory and their comprehension. So they don't have learning disability, but look at the test scores in these areas. And the frustrating part that I've seen is that the subtests are low, then they average them out and they come out to be like low average. And then they say, yeah, he's fine. But if you really look at the differences between some of these scores versus maybe other scores in other areas that are much more average or even above average, and then you think about the struggles they've been having and how they can relate to the fact that, wow, I mean, that kind of makes sense. In X class, he's having difficulty keeping up processing, or reading comprehension is an issue, or anything like that. And then you can correlate that. So no, he doesn't have a learning disability. Doesn't mean that he does not need an IEP. There's a lot of reasons for that. So that would be my answer. I would definitely ask for an evaluation. My son's school is barely scheduling an SST meeting, but keeps postponing it. Since then, he has been diagnosed with ADHD. How long should they take for a 504 plan to be put into action? School will be out in 3 months, and I feel like they are lagging on purpose. So I don't know what that means, SST, because every school has different. I'm assuming that is the meeting to determine whether or not he's eligible for a 504 plan. They shouldn't take any time at all. It's a very informal eval, and that, along with the data that you put in a letter saying this is what's occurring right now, he is not accessing his education. They should be responding to that. So I don't know if you're doing that, but just make sure you're putting it in writing. Make sure that you put it in writing, the date that, or if there's several meetings that were scheduled and these are the ones that were scheduled and they were postponed, the diagnosis that occurred on what date, and the data that shows that he's not accessing his education. They are responsible for that. So I would put that all in writing. That is inexcusable that they keep, I don't know why this has happened. I don't know, but I think I would really go after them in writing, explain the data, what you see, and send it off right away. Make sure you know who the director is of the 504 plans, and send it off. They shouldn't be lagging at all. And you should, if you think, I don't know who suggested it, whether you did or the school did, but obviously something is being seen where he is struggling. Anybody else? Oh. My son's school is barely scheduling we already read that one. Is it ever too late in a school year to receive a 504 plan? Nope, it is absolutely not too late. No, it's never too late to receive either one of those. Never let a school tell you that. And remember too, these are fluid documents. They can be changed at any time, revised at any time. The fact that the 504 just is looked at yearly, but certainly you look at it before a year. Legally, the IEP has to be IEP meeting has to take place yearly. But you can have IEP meetings all year. You can make changes to an IEP without a formal meeting if it is agreed upon by the team too. That is also possible. So I think that I will, it is now after 9, so I'm gonna end this for now. But I can tell you that click on my link for the masterclass and take a look at it. And remember that it's $87 a year, and I'm providing course content, a private Facebook group, and group coaching biweekly. And also too, if you have any questions that you think of when you go off here now and you want to reach out to me, you certainly can do that too. addadvocate.com is my website with content as well. So that's separate from my masterclass. But you can reach out to me through my webinar as well with questions, and I'll certainly be happy to answer them. But thank you, all of you, for coming. I appreciate your attendance, and I hope that I have helped in your advocacy journey. Thank you.